Minis. They can get expensive, and most stores won't accept my firstborn as a form of valid currency, so I'm going to make my own cheap ones really fast. Today we'll be using large scissors, small scissors, an X-Acto knife, Mod Podge and general PVA glue, cheap foam applicators, standard printing paper, and Popsicle Sticks, plus printer. So I've experimented with paper minis before. I've been running the Lost Mines of Foundelver for a group of new players, and last minute needed to create something for use on the tabletop. Only had a black and white printer at the time and needed to get these done super quick, so they were only one-sided and generally looked like garbage. My next iteration was better, upgraded to color and spent more time cutting out the edges to silhouette the mini. I also got the image printed on both sides, pretty massive upgrade all around. I'm coming up to the point in Foundelver where my players are going to be traveling a lot, and the module has these roll tables for random wilderness encounters. I've never run random encounters before, so decided it would be a fun project to make all the minis for these ahead of time and try to do so as quickly as possible. My process for making these starts with Photoshop, but there's plenty of other software that can be used to do this sort of thing. I make sure that I can measure out exactly how large my minis are going to be on the paper and then start looking up artwork to use. If you're artistic yourself, you can even draw your own custom creatures if you want. I currently don't have that kind of time though, so I'm just going to yank official monster art off the web. Once I have most of the minis I'll need spread out over the page and sized correctly, I go ahead and print out one side. I'm pretty sure my printer has a print on both sides feature, but I haven't figured out how to use it yet and didn't want to right now. Then I flipped the page over and reprinted the same layout, but inverted it this time. It came out looking pretty good. Now I had a front and back for all of these charming and definitely not foul-smelling gentlemen. After this I went ahead and cut out each of the figures and made sure to leave little blank tabs underneath their feet for the base. This took way longer than I expected given the number of minis I was making, but it's the perfect opportunity to just put a YouTube video on in the background and relax while you're getting into the groove. Once all that's done, I went ahead and started making the bases for these guys. This is where things got a little out of hand. You see, I've been using Popsicle Sticks for all of my minis up to this point, but one of the rules I instituted for making these random encounter monsters was that I wanted to be able to produce a bunch of these things, fast. Cutting Popsicle Sticks without them cracking is not the fastest process. So I opted to use these tags that I got from Hobby Lobby that were just sitting around gathering dust. They're durable enough to make the minis stand and definitely could be pumped out a lot quicker. These worked great, but the one downside is that they're just not as bottom heavy, aka they tip over a lot easier. The point was to produce a larger number of these minis quickly, however, and I think this will fit the bill for now. It's not perfect, but it works. With the hobgoblins done, the orcs came next, then the goblins, ghouls, and wolves, oh my. Given the fact that I like giving myself headaches, however, I decided to get fancy with the sturges. Since these nasty little creatures could fly, I wanted to make bases that reflected that, rather than having them awkwardly right against the ground. To do this, I decided to use super cheap toothpicks. I think I picked these things up for 98 cents and cut them down to the height I wanted. Then I made a little wedge out of my tab bases, glued that on the bottom with PVA glue, and then finally glued a sturge to the top. It definitely works. It's not the prettiest mini, and they also like to fall over, a lot. But for a rush project, they'll do the job. In total, I just made 42 smaller minis, all table ready in about an hour. Next was going to be the larger ones, the owlbear and the ogre. Regular paper works just fine with smaller minis. They're a little floppy, but they're not so large that it really matters. For larger figures, however, I've had to develop a slightly different method to make sure they don't just fall over. They also definitely have to have popsicle bases. That extra weight at the bottom just can't be sacrificed if you want them to stay upright. I had printed out my owlbear and ogre earlier, but instead of going double-sided, I printed an inverted copy of both on the same page. Cut these out and then folded them over so that the image was the same on both sides, then used some Mod Podge to glue the little monster books together. Obviously, you want to make sure to get all of the air bubbles out of these because you don't want any weird bumps in your minis, and also because they deserve to be destroyed. After waiting a little while for these to dry, I cut out the minis like all the rest and then pulled the death knife out to go through the long process of chopping popsicle sticks for their bases. This took forever, but was well worth it as the end product was a larger mini that was stable enough to stand on its own. Now I'm ready to let my players exhaust all their spell slots and use up any magical items I give them before they even get to where they're going. If I'm really lucky, maybe these guys will even manage to pull off a meaningless TPK. That's about it. This is a really great project because you'll be able to use these guys in a lot of different scenarios going forward. If you found this video useful, please feel free to drop a like and a subscription, and if you're feeling especially generous, please take a look at my Patreon. Still getting it up and running, but the great old ones are always looking for new victims. I mean, followers. Also, thanks for being my first subscriber, George.